Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm really happy to have David Dickinson here with us today to talk about working with small groups to improve vocabulary skills. And before we start, I'll just give a few webinar tips for your viewing today. If you have any applications open, such as email that use bandwidth, if you close those, that'll help make sure that you're receiving the best quality video of your webinar. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can enter those into the questions panel or the questions tab in your webinar panel, and then we'll answer those at the end of this webinar. And if you want to move the webinar panel out of the way to give you a little bit more room to view the video, you can click the little orange arrow at the top of the webinar panel, and that'll minimize your controls. And if you click it again, that'll expand the controls for you. And if you have any audio issues during the webinar, you can switch to your phone and you can dial in using the instructions in the audio tab of the webinar panel, and that usually gets rid of any audio issues that you may be having. And a couple of the reminders, this webinar will be recorded. You will receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email tomorrow, and you'll also receive in that email a link to your certificate, as well as the slide handouts from this webinar as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to David Dickinson, co-author of Connecting Through Talk, also co-authored by Ann Morse. And I'll turn it over to you, David.
Hi. Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I was excited when I got a chance to see where people are from. You're from all over the country, including I found a lot of my hometown. So if any of the folks here from Lincoln, Nebraska, or Oak Park, Philadelphia, Boston, Nashville, those are all places that I've lived. So it's exciting to have such national attendance here. Okay, I'm going to talk about teaching vocabulary, which is a topic that I've spent a number of years conducting research on. And I'm going to be sharing just a little bit of information, sort of background, a little bit of theory, but not much. And then show you a couple of videos of wonderful teachers we have worked with here in Nashville, working with groups of children. This research that this is based on research that was conducted with generous support from the Institute for Educational Sciences, it's in the Department of Education, in collaboration with colleagues from Temple University in Delaware. Okay, so why should you worry about teaching vocabulary to children who are in preschool? Traditionally, our schools haven't gotten serious about vocabulary until the teachers are starting to worry about standardized tests, or maybe in middle school. But increasingly, research that I've done and many others have done has demonstrated that knowledge of vocabulary is absolutely critical for reading comprehension. In fact, by the time children are in grades 3 and 4, it's the most powerful predictor of children's reading comprehension abilities. And for children who are from low-income backgrounds and children who are learning English as a new language, it's especially important, and it's especially big stumbling block for their success in learning to read once they've learned how to sound out the words, once they've gotten good with decoding. So not only does vocabulary help with comprehension, but actually stronger vocabulary helps at the very beginning stages of reading. It helps build phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and I suspect many of you spend some time playing rhyming games or doing things to help build phonemic awareness. In fact, children with larger vocabularies are also acquiring greater phonemic awareness for reasons that I won't go into here, but it does help build that foundational skill that's important for decoding, which of course we all want to have children gain skill with. Now, why should we worry about it when children are ages 3, 4, 5, which I suspect many of you are teaching children in these early years? The reason is because there are profoundly strong connections between size of a child's vocabulary when they're 3 and 4 and subsequent years. So the size of a child's vocabulary is a very strong predictor of their later vocabulary, and that's partly because the more you know, the more you're able to learn. So you can acquire new words because you can connect them to other words that you already know. So what are some successes, some tips for being successful in trying to teach children new vocabulary. There are just a few here that I'm going to give you. One is use those words in complete, meaningful sentences. I haven't seen this in some years, but I have in the past seen people teaching vocabulary just with flashcards, and the children would be just sort of drilled with words. What's this? What's this? What's this? That's a singularly boring and ineffective way to teach vocabulary. So you want to be using the words in sentences so the children get a sense of how they function, what their grammatical structure is, and so forth. And their meaning of the words comes through because how you hear them in a sentence. Secondly, you want to make the meanings clear. So give a simple definition for the words. Use pictures, gestures, the tone of your voice. I have a doc student who's found that even associating words with a sound, like a little chime with the word imagination, help the children learn that word a little better. So there are all kinds of ways that you can embellish children's word knowledge with those additional multimodal kind of learning opportunities. Third, this is critical. Help children learn to use words. This is a critical element for teaching language in general. All too often, classrooms are dominated by teachers' talk. And it can be hard to create space for children to talk, but certainly when you're playing the games I'm going to be showing you, you can leave opportunities for all the children to use those words. If you've ever learned a foreign language, or as I have tried to learn a foreign language, I know I can't make much progress unless I say that word and get the phonological representation, the sounds of that in my mouth. So get the children saying the words. Finally, provide lots of opportunities for the children to hear the words and see the words. And games are wonderful because you can do them over and over again and it's not boring. Book reading, of course, is probably the single most important way to build language, but we're not talking about that today. And then conversations that occur throughout the day. Those are all powerful. We're going to focus on games here today. So one of the first challenges that teachers have in teaching vocabulary is, what words do I teach? Curricula increasingly now are providing some suggestions, but the beauty of vocabulary is you can come up with your own sets of words also. So here are just a few tips that I would provide. First of all, you want to be sure that you're stretching children's vocabularies. Don't select a word to teach intentionally that they're going to learn in the next 6 months just because it's such a common word. So you want to go outside the bounds of the standard vocabulary that you think, well, I think a lot of 4-year-olds are going to learn this. Make it ones that, well, maybe a 6-year-old won't know this or a 7-year-old won't know it. That way you're really going to be using your instructional time to stretch their vocabulary. So there's all kinds of words. The easiest for people to notice are names for novel places and animals and nouns. I'm not even giving examples here because those come to mind. Say, oh, I don't think the child knows the name of this animal or object, and so you name it. Now, what doesn't come as naturally are to think of interesting verbs. So here I have some example of action words. Like instead of saying walk, you could say stride, saunter, stroll, meander, scamper. All different. They all have nuances. You see, they all have different kinds of meanings. And I just want to mention scamper for a minute here. I like that example. Judy Schickendance and I are co-authors of a preschool curriculum, Opening the World of Learning. And she was in a classroom one year where they had used OWL. And she was there with the children in the fall, and they'd had it the previous year, and she was hanging out with kids on the playground. She saw, one child saw a squirrel running along a power line. And the child said, oh, look, he's scampering along the line. And Judy says, you know, I just know that child had learned the word the previous year because it's so unusual. And that's one of the words we teach in OWL. And I mention that because for two reasons. One is you never know when children are picking up words, and they pick up interesting words and they hold on to those interesting words. The other thing is, once you teach words, children tend to remember them. If you've really taught them well, they stick. So there's real value in spending some time on vocabulary. Okay, you can also find words that are interesting to describe. They describe things in an interesting way. Enormous, huge, monumental, tremendous. Here's another example. in our curriculum, there's a Noisy Nora. You might know the book Noisy Nora. Nora's a little mouse girl who gets upset and hides. At the end of the book, her parents find her. They open the door, and she's on this huge pile of junk that comes crashing out, and it's described as a monumental crash. And I can tell you, every child who ever heard that book and had the few chances to read it learned the word monumental. So those kids love words like that. Finally, try to teach words that are related to each other so that they build connections to each other. If you're having a unit on plants, words that describe the leaf, blossom, stem, roots. Children learn words more readily when they're building semantic webs of interconnected things. Okay, that's enough for theory. So where do you find words? Well, everywhere. Typically, people look at the unit of study. What are some words that are useful here? I recommend that you, with your team, come up with like 10 words or so, 15 words you're going to teach. Books and everyday life. Now, books are filled with these. If you just go with a sleuth, the eye of a sleuth. So here's Farmer Duck. Here on this first page is talking about the duck bringing food to the lazy farmer, and the farmer's lounging in bed. And then later the duck fetches the cow. So right there on a couple of pages, we have interesting words that you could pick up and use. Okay, now teaching words with games. Here are a couple of general procedures which we have used in research, and we found that the learning of the words that occurs with our games is significant and roughly equivalent to what they get from book reading. So, but they all have certain strategies. We introduce the word first. You have to have words you choose, and then you have a plan for how you're going to define that word and how you're going to use it. So we use picture cards. On the back of the picture card, we put the definition and often a little prompt question. And we have a gesture for the words. Kids love the gestures. They'll sometimes remember the gestures better than the word. Teachers are very creative. You can come up with your own gestures. And the kids they can help you decide what the gesture should be. So introduce the word with the definition, a sentence, and a gesture. And over time, as you play the game, transfer the responsibility for when you go through these picture cards to introduce them. Instead of you telling them the name of the word or defining it, have the children begin to use the words and give the definition so that it's more of a conversation. Then have the children use the words, try to pick them up during the day, at other times of the day, and most of all, have fun. Games are for fun. You want to encourage children to be successful. While there's little bits of competition involved, you don't want the competition to begin to crowd out the fun, because it's the fun that's what makes these work. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of a board game that we used. And here you can see the board. It was a very simple little trail. Children just went from the beginning until the end, moving their markers along the board. You could make up all kinds of board games of your own. In this one, we used colors, and the children used colors to decide where they moved to. So we had a picture card that had a word on it. We had a word definition. This is for the introducing the words. We had picture cards to introduce the words. The game board had that little trail that I showed you, and you can add chutes and ladders and things if you want, if children can deal with those sort of upsets. We have these little game cards that have a picture for each word, and the game card had a color on it, so that once the child had picked up the picture of say, giraffe, they would, and it had orange on it. Once they talked about what a giraffe was, they would move to this spot on the trail that had orange, and then of course they each had a game piece. So you play the games. First you introduce the words, and you define it, and then you turn over responsibilities to the children. The children turn over the card, and somehow they show knowledge. They give the definition of the word, and then you can, depending on the child's language sophistication, you can just have the child say it, or a more medium level, have the child say it and define it, or you can have them use the word in sentences. Then you get the other children to say the word. So it's not just passive, just one child is doing the word, but other children join in and they also say the word, and then you move the marker. Okay, I'm going to show you this in action here with one of our preschool teachers. So I'm going to switch to showing the video, and you'll have to stay with me for just a second while I get this so that I can show it. So you're going to see the teacher introducing the word here, and that you're going to see her playing the game. And I want you to notice the little conversation. It's going to jump for different points in the game. Just for speed, we're going to just kind of move through the introduction and then the play of the game.
Okay. All right, now this is the one you noticed on the movie this morning. What is this? What is it? What is it, Emma? You cook stuff in it? What is it?
A big pot.
A big pot?
Big pot.
Show me your cauldron. Cauldron. Say it again. Cauldron. Okay. Now, see if you remember Emerald. What is this, Emma? Abdomen. What's your abdomen? Everybody show me their abdomen. Abdomen. Where's your abdomen? Okay, now let me ask you. I forgot to ask the questions, but here we go. Emma, do you feel hungry or sleepy in your abdomen? Hungry. Do you feel hungry in your abdomen? All right. What is, show everybody. What is that? Not stretch. That's close. Does anybody remember what we call that? Strut. Strut. What does that mean? He's proud. Show me your strut. Michaela, show me your strut. Say strut. Say strut. Strut. All right, I'm going to put it down. Oh, whoa. I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to ask you, why would someone strut after they won the game? If they won the game and they were strutting, why would they strut? Hey, friends. Hey, friends. Why would somebody strut after they won a game? They were proud that they won?
Yeah.
Yeah, were they proud of themselves?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, now you can move orange. And
David, it looks like you might still be on mute. You may just have to unmute yourself. Oh, David, you're still on mute. In the webinar panel, there's a little icon of a microphone. If you just click that, it'll unmute you. David, you're still on mute. We can't hear you.
Hello, are I now there?
Oh, there we go. Yep,
Hello?
now we can hear you.
Oh, man, I'm sorry. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, so I think after you play the video, you'll just have to unmute yourself. I think it
Oh, well,
mutes you during the video.
I tried every way I could. Okay, people hear me now? So I'm going to go on and talk about playing bingo.
Yes, yep.
Sorry about that. Thought we had all those kinks worked out. Okay, so you probably all are familiar with bingo. So the same sort of basic strategies happen. You introduce the pictures. You have little bingo boards, and then the children play the words. The thing that we do that's important, that's a little different than what you're used to, is that you make sure that the children use the name and give a gesture to go with the word. And then you have a little conversation about the word. And that's the critical part. Just as in the last one, you notice the teacher was pushing the children, what does strut mean? When do you strut? Those little personalized conversations are going to really be building children's understanding of the vocabulary. And so I'm going to now show you a teacher who's doing a nice job using bingo, and hopefully we can toggle back and forth in a way that's a little more seamless.
Okay. A type of animal with big front teeth like a mouse. It's called a
Rat.
not a rat, but a rodents. What do rodents look like?
That's kind of hard.
Oh, don't talk about it. That's personal business. You sure do. Well, what do they have? They have what? Big
Sharp teeth.
big teeth.
And they can also have
They could have fangs, maybe. Do they have 2 legs or 4 legs? 4 legs. They look like they crawling, right? Blackbird does not like rodents. A hole in the ground where animals live. Burrow. What kind of animals live in a burrow? Rabbits. Bunnies, bees, mice, beaver. Okay. They have teeth. They're rodents.
All right, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
All right, well, that was easy. Good. So here you see the teacher and engaging the children in little conversations, and with other words, she has like a lot of personal things will come in. They'll talk about something close to from their own lives. So the beauty of these games is they provide those opportunities for personalized conversations that can be brief, but can be about a lot of different topics. Okay, so to conclude here, it's really important to remember that children are always learning new words. And so you should always be using interesting words as you talk with them. And you never know when they're picking them up. So I have one more little story. So I have a just 3-year-old granddaughter. And the other day, she was riding with her dad on the back of his bike, and she hates going over bumps when he takes her over bumps. And so she said, "Daddy, can you please avoid the bumps?" So avoid is not a usual word you'd expect for 3-year-olds, but she must have heard it used somewhere and it really meant something to her. So in addition to playing games and reading books, use interesting words all day long. And expect kids to pick them up and celebrate when they are using them. Second thing, remember games should be fun, and then adjust the complexity to match your children's level. What I showed you was for 4-year-olds, you may find ways to make them easier or harder. And finally, the comment I made earlier, remember that children remember the words for many years. So spending some time teaching words now is going to have some long-term benefits. So that's what I have to say right now. We'll have some time for comments and questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, David. So for today's webinar, we'll be giving away 3 free copies of Connecting Through Talk, Nurturing Children's Development with Language, co-authored by David Dickinson and Ann Morse. And those attendees that are selected will be notified in an email after today's webinar. And if you can go to the next slide for me, David.
Oops, I think I did too. Okay.
Okay, and so we're also running a discount for all coffee chat attendees. You can use the code there on your screen, Coffee Talk, and you can save 20% on most products at brookspublishing.com, including on David's book. And if you're looking for more professional development opportunities, we have plenty of coffee chats available that have already been recorded, and we have several upcoming chats as well. So you can go to that bit.ly there on your screen, and you can see all of our previous recordings as well as all of our upcoming chats, and we try to update this page weekly as we add new presentations. And we also have several other resources available for early childhood professionals working during this COVID-19 crisis. You can go to this webpage here on your screen, and you can find recommended reading, downloadable resources, and other professional development webinars as well to help assist you through these difficult times. And so with that, we will open it up for questions. Again, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask David, you can just enter those into the questions tab of your webinar panel. But we do have a few here. So David, we have a listener that was wondering, during the times of this pandemic, is it still possible to have group games and activities? And what sort of adjustments may they need to make to kind of facilitate these sort of games?
Well, I mean, I guess there's the social distancing kinds of issues, so I wouldn't want to have. I am not an epidemiologist. I'm not going to make any recommendations for getting children together in groups. So, whatever strategies you might have in place, I would suggest that you can do that. Now, boy, I suspect that through Zoom, you could probably come up. Okay, off the cuff, you can be creative. I'm being forced to be creative on the spot. So here's an idea. You could have all of the children who are going to play with you could have sets of cards, and they could mix the cards up that have pictures on them, and they'd have to all be the same cards. You could go through with the group, introducing the pictures and say, okay, I'm going to show a card, and who can find this card first? So you could have the kids who are in their little different rooms pick up the card and say the word. I mean, that's something I just came up with on the spot. But if you scratch your head, maybe you could come up with other things where you have some kind of shared resource and then you go through the words together. Of course, you can do book reading together. I sing songs. My 3-year-old now calls and says, Grandpa, can you sing with me? So I think through FaceTime and Zoom and those kinds of things, you could have some interaction around vocabulary.
Okay, great. And we had another listener that was wondering, in the board game video that you showed, was the board game that teacher was using, was that something that was purchased, or can programs kind of make their own board games?
We made that for research purposes. You can maybe even find boards that you could, like Chutes and Ladders, so you could just make adjustments to a Chutes and Ladders board. I mean, the thing about games is just turn yourself loose, get a piece of a board and say, what do I want the trail to look like? And can my kids deal with ladders and chutes and snakes and say or not? They just have a simple trail. So the thing that we did was the children moved based on colors. Now, if you want to have dice and roll dice, they could move that. I mean, you can just be creative. If you played games in your past, hopefully you can draw on that experience, but totally take control of it yourself.
Great. We also have another listener that was wondering, if you have any suggestions for adapting these games for dual language learners.
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked. I've been doing research that's focusing on vocabulary for 12, 15 years. Many of the children in our studies are second language learners. And we find that the children who are second language learners are able to learn the words almost as readily as native speakers. So I actually think that you don't, other than making cultural adaptations and choosing words that would be familiar to them from their own homes and their cultures, that there aren't special adjustments. You would just need to be very careful that you are explicit in the methods that I use, and I would encourage, give the children a little more time to pronounce the words, and don't put the children in the spotlight. I would be cautious about forcing them to say much more than just the word until you're sure they're able to do it. You don't want to make them be starting to use sentences, because that would be harder. So I would adjust the level of engagement in conversation so that I'm not overtaxing them. But they can learn the words, the same sets of words you're teaching to native speakers. Second language learners can learn them with almost equally with equal speed as the native speakers.
Great, thank you. Let's see here, I'm just scrolling through our questions. How can, so we have another listener here, and they're wondering how they can support parents that want to try these games at home.
Well, I think you need to give the parents some suggestions. A simple, I mean, there are lotto games. People can buy lotto games on, Amazon or your local. I like to go to your local store and see if they have games, because a lot of bingo style games have pictures of animals and so forth. And what I would do is, if a parent wants to play a game like that, would just give them the suggestions that really be sure that you're defining the word and talking about it, and don't make it about how fast you can go through the game, but make it about how rich a conversation you can have about each word. A game that I didn't come up with or didn't talk about, you can also have concentration games. If you must have all played or seen kids playing concentration where you need to match two cards that are the same, parents could make, or if you could provide parents images of pictures of two cards that would reflect the same word, they could have the kids practicing trying to turn them over. Or you could play, I don't know, in my youth we used to call it Old Maid. There may be a more appropriate name now, where children ask each other's for what kind of a card. Do you have a picture of an ocelot, or do you have a picture of meander? And so they can give it to each other. So those are just a few suggestions.
Great. We also have a few listeners that are saying that there's tons of online dice and free spinners and coin toss simulators that you can find online, as well as blank path games that people can download for free online as well.
Yeah, I'm sure there's the critical thing you need to add are these sort of general elements that I encourage, was you introduce the word and have the children use the word, and get a brief conversations that makes them think about it. When would you strut? Why? How would you feel when you're strutting? What happens in your stomach? So that you're deepening children's understanding of the word, and you're not just trying to make it a speed to see how many words you can say.
Okay, and we also have a listener that's asking, they say they work with children that have very low spoken language, and they have a lot of difficulty with basic vocabulary. So are there some sort of modifications that you could recommend for working with these children?
Well, I think the basic modification would come in, first of all, the words that you would choose. So if you have children with very limited spoken vocabulary, I've worked with a colleague, Ann Kaiser, who's worked with children with Down syndrome and autism. And I know they're very careful to select words that are words that would be referring to, say, everyday objects or simple actions that we would want the children to do. I would reduce the expectation for them to talk much. And gestures, I think unless they have some sort of motoric complications, they might be able to use gestures to refer to words. I would keep the game simple. If you're going to do a board-like game, have it be a little short path, or a bingo, have just very few different spaces so that you're not overtaxing children. But really, it's the choice of the words, and you kind of have to use your sense of what are words that you see would be useful in everyday life that you could choose, and the children could get more facility with them at would improve their ability to communicate.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So I think we've covered most of the questions. So if there's any questions that we missed, we will be reviewing these after the webinar, and we can follow up with you after the webinar. But I'd like to just say another thank you to David for giving this presentation today.
Okay, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right, and thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.